Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the foggy morning of June 1519, in the heart of Tudor England, at Blackmore Priory in Essex, to be precise. The stone walls here sweat with the anticipation of something, but most of the household servants pretend they notice nothing out of the ordinary. Chickens shuffle in the yard, the cook stirs something oniony over the fire, and outside, carts creak and mud squelches under the boots of groomsmen who would rather be anywhere else. The summer air smells of rain, horses and secrets. Mostly secrets. You are in the service of Lady Elizabeth Blount, a woman with an air of nervous importance. She's sequestered in an upstairs chamber, wringing her hands and biting back cries as labour pains rack her body. Nobody dares say it aloud, but you know who the father is, and the fact that this isn't an ordinary birth is a fact so thick in the air you could butter bread with it. Downstairs the priest paces, muttering prayers for both body and soul, while a page sneaks off to report to someone even higher up. A king, in fact, who waits restlessly for word that a son has been born. So here's your reality check. You probably won't survive this day with your innocence or your job intact if you talk too much, or to the wrong person. Everyone in this house is playing a dangerous game, whether they know it or not. Drop a comment with where you're listening from, and what time it is. Do you think you'd survive Tudor court gossip? And don't forget to let me know. If you could meet any almost king, would you take the risk? Now let's tiptoe straight into the story of Henry FitzRoy, the royal bastard who might have been king. Close your eyes unless you're driving and picture it. The first cries of a newborn echo through stone halls. And history doesn't know it yet, but it just took a sharp turn. You stand outside the chamber door, holding your breath as a midwife whispers, "It's a boy." The words flutter like a startled sparrow down the corridor. Not just any boy, a boy born to Elizabeth Blount, favourite of King Henry VIII, whose royal appetite is as legendary as his temper. The king, who is about as subtle as a warhammer, hasn't exactly kept this affair a secret from anyone in his inner circle. Not that anyone would dare whisper it in front of Queen Catherine. Already you can sense the undercurrent of panic and ambition swirling through the house. The news is quickly wrapped up and sent galloping towards London, like a letter with a wax seal and a stick of dynamite for a signature. The king is going to be ecstatic, but also, let's be honest, a little bit smug. That's right, it's 1519, and you're about to witness a royal scandal so juicy it would make the Kardashians look like the nuns of Sion Abbey. Henry FitzRoy, named for his father, Henry, and the fact that, well, FitzRoy literally means son of the king, is already famous before he even opens his eyes. Not a legitimate heir, mind you, just an openly acknowledged bastard, which is basically Tudor England's version of complicated relationship status. Let's be real, if you were a commoner, you'd barely rate a blip on the king's radar for having a son. But Henry VIII is obsessed with the idea of a male heir. His marriage to Queen Catherine of Aragon, now entering its 10-year mark, has produced only a single living child, Princess Mary, and that's a problem. Daughters don't count in the royal math of the day, at least not in England, where no woman has ever worn the crown in her own right. Every morning, the king wakes up and wonders whether God is playing a cosmic prank on him. As for you, you're part of a world where everything has a double meaning, and every footstep in the corridor could spell your future or your doom. News of Henry FitzRoy's birth rockets through the grapevine. Nobles hear about it within days. Commoners in taverns will joke nervously about it for years. The Queen herself, up at Greenwich Palace, is supposed to act as if nothing's happened. She's forced to grit her teeth and send a polite, slightly pinched congratulation to Lady Blount. You might expect a bit of discretion, but this is King Henry VIII we're talking about. He's delighted, and unlike most monarchs, he doesn't try to keep his happiness a secret. When he visits the newborn for the first time, it's an event. A whole parade, horses and trumpets and all. Courtiers scramble to find the right balance between congratulating and not offending. Even the Queen's closest allies are left guessing. Is this a humiliation or a warning? Maybe both. A few things are clear right from the start. First, Henry FitzRoy is going to be raised differently than most royal bastards. No secret cloisters for him. No rural exile. From early on, he's surrounded by tutors, doctors, and minders fit for a prince, though never called one. You can imagine Lady Blount's pride, but also her anxiety. Every day she's reminded her son's life depends on royal whim, not birthright. A wrong word, a whiff of scandal, and it could all come crashing down. Tudor kings aren't famous for mercy. Second, the birth is a political bombshell. In every candlelit corner of the palace, someone is whispering about what it means. Henry VIII has a son, not a legitimate one, but a son all the same. And if he can have one with a mistress, why not with the Queen? Or, failing that, why not legitimize this one? The law is clear, but laws can be changed. Kings write their own history, until they don't. So, you watch as baby FitzRoy is christened in a ceremony as grand as any royal child, except for the fact that no one dares call him prince. The chapel is cold, the air thick with incense and ambition. Godparents are chosen from the highest ranks, an open hint that this boy is more than just a nobleman's byblow. By FitzRoy's second year, he's already the subject of international gossip. Ambassadors jot down notes, speculating what the king will do next. The Queen, meanwhile, is on a never-ending schedule of prayers and penance, hoping for another pregnancy that will give England a true heir. Each time her belly swells, the palace holds its breath. Each time she loses another child, the mood darkens. It's like watching someone roll dice with fate, and nobody seems to be winning. You see little Henry's nursery filled with exotic gifts, silver rattles from the king, tapestries embroidered with lions, and tiny wooden swords. He learns to walk on imported carpets and babbles in Latin to his nursemaids. Sometimes Henry VIII visits in person, bouncing the boy on his knee, and the whole household walks on eggshells, praying the king won't notice the stain on his doublet or the draught from the window. Not everyone is thrilled. The Queen's allies, especially the powerful Spanish ambassador, look on with suspicion. What if the king tries to set aside Catherine for good? Or worse yet, crown his bastard? The Pope's eyebrows are practically halfway to Scotland. England's old laws say only a legitimate child can inherit, but Henry VIII is nothing if not creative when it comes to getting what he wants. If you're clever, you realise FitzRoy's birth is the opening shot in a battle that will tear England apart for decades. His existence means every noble family with a daughter is suddenly interested in the king's son. You'll see rivalries flare up like bonfires at midsummer, with every mother at court secretly plotting to get her daughter into the king's good graces if not into his bed. The years pass, and you see little FitzRoy toddle through palatial gardens, a chubby, red-cheeked boy with a world of possibility at his feet, and a world of danger snapping at his heels. Already, he's attended by lords and grooms who know better than to gossip within earshot. You notice how carefully his education is managed. Latin, music, horsemanship, even a little fencing. Not prince material, at least on paper, but certainly not ordinary either. One day, you catch sight of King Henry and young FitzRoy together, playing at archery. The king beams with pride, his copper hair glinting in the sun, and for a moment, you see the faintest outline of a different England, a country where a bastard, openly acknowledged and beloved, might one day wear the crown. It's just, you don't get a manual for surviving the Tudor court, but if you did, keep your mouth shut would be rule number one. The thing about royal bastards is, they're supposed to be swept under the tapestry, except when they aren't. By the time FitzRoy is 3, it's clear that Henry VIII is determined to do everything but hide him. It's the ultimate royal flex. Yes, I have a son out of wedlock, and I'll treat him better than most men treat their legitimate children. Subtle? Not even close. You watch as the king, your boss if you're lucky, your nightmare if you aren't, starts parading the little boy at Windsor, Hampton Court, and Greenwich. Most nobles barely get an audience with the king's dogs, but here comes this giggling curly-haired toddler, sitting on the king's lap during public dinners, dropping bread crusts and sticky bits of quince paste right onto his father's velvet. Court musicians are instructed to play cheerful tunes, and a few brave jesters make jokes at their own expense, anything to keep the king in a good mood. You notice that whenever FitzRoy enters the room, courtiers shift nervously. How are you supposed to address him? Your Grace? Some young master with the golden rattle and royal temper? Nobody dares ask directly. Henry VIII's glare is sharper than his sword, and he's got both at his disposal. Instead, you learn to watch the subtler clues. Who's invited to FitzRoy's birthday feasts? who gets to ride beside him on hunting trips, who's suddenly in favour or out of favour with the snap of the king's fingers. You see some lords leaning in, eager to curry favour, slipping the boy little trinkets, carved wooden horses, tiny books of prayers, the occasional miniature falcon, while others keep their distance, murmuring about the dangerous precedent being set. You overhear whispers among the ladies in waiting. If Fitzroy is so beloved, what does that mean for Princess Mary? Will the king dare to upend tradition and make his bastard the heir? The older nobles scoff, muttering about the Plantagenets and the chaos of earlier centuries. The younger ones, always looking for an angle, begin to plot. Why not tie their fortunes to this up-and-coming boy, just in case the wind changes? Court life is a performance, and every day is opening night. You watch as Fitzroy's world expands. The king arranges for the best tutors, men who have lectured at Oxford and Cambridge, their heads full of Latin and Greek and their pockets suddenly heavier. There's Master Richard Croke, known for his skill with languages, and Dr. John Chambers, an expert in medicine. Though, let's face it, the main prescription for any illness in Tudor England is bleed the patient and hope for the best. The boy is taught to read, write and ride before most kids can say Reformation. You see him reciting lines from Virgil one day, and the next day nearly toppling off a pony, only to scramble back up, cheeks red, determined not to cry. All the while the king keeps Fitzroy close. On feast days, you see them sitting side by side, the king carving meat onto the boy's plate, grinning proudly at his appetite. It's a not-so-subtle message to the court. This is my flesh and blood. Watch it, but there's a limit, even for a king. Legitimacy is a wall, and Henry can't just knock it down. Not yet. You see it every time the question of succession comes up. The lawyers, those experts at finding loopholes big enough to sail a galleon through, still shake their heads. The laws of England, at least for now, are stubborn. Only a son born in wedlock can inherit. Still, you watch the king's eyes narrow every time someone mentions the rules. He doesn't like being told what he can't do. As Fitzroy grows, so does his retinue. The little boy has his own servants, his own tutors, his own guards. He wears clothes more expensive than most people's houses. You hear stories of Fitzroy's mother, Elizabeth Blount, elevated to the status of noblewoman and later married off to a trusted courtier, Sir Gilbert Taleboys, a reward that's part honour, part political convenience. The message is clear. Lady Blount has served her purpose, and her future and her sons are now inextricably tied to the king's fortunes. There are moments of awkwardness at formal events. You see Princess Mary, Henry's legitimate daughter, forced to be polite to her half-brother, who, though a bastard, is favoured by their father in ways she will never be. You catch Mary shooting Fitzroy glances, equal parts envy and confusion. It's the royal equivalent of being benched while your rival takes the field, and everyone knows it. You hear the rumours too, that the Queen herself has thrown Fitz behind closed doors weeping in frustration, and that her allies at court are watching every move Fitzroy makes. The Spanish ambassador writes home in code, warning his king that England is restless, and the matter of succession is unsettled. He's not wrong. The entire court is holding its breath, waiting to see what Henry will do next. And what Henry does next is, well, very Henry. He doubles down. If the world won't give Fitzroy a crown, he'll give him everything else. At age 6, Fitzroy is elevated to the peerage. You attend the ceremony, a lavish incense-choked affair at the monastery church in Reading. The boy, small and solemn in velvet and ermine, kneels before the king, who declares him Duke of Richmond and Somerset. The lords and ladies whisper, some in awe, some in alarm. The boy is now the highest-ranking noble in England, aside from the king himself. It's a signal flare, bright enough for every power player in Europe to see. Fitzroy now has lands, vast swathes of northern England, manors that make lesser nobles green with envy. He has a household of his own, filled with gentlemen and ladies, whose jobs are to teach him courtly manners, keep him healthy, and above all, keep him safe. You watch as the royal wardrobe is raided for the boy's new clothes, doublets of cloth of gold, silk stockings, boots with velvet tops. The cooks grumble about having to prepare extra courses for the duke's table. The servants compete for favour, hoping for a mention in the boy's prayers, or better yet his father's ear. Still, for all the luxury, there's an undercurrent of danger. You sense it every time FitzRoy travels outside the court, guarded by knights who scan every shadow for assassins or would-be kidnappers. There are those who see him as a threat, a living reminder that the king's marriage is not invincible, and the succession is not settled. In the eyes of ambitious courtiers, FitzRoy is both a golden ticket and a ticking time bomb. But if you think a 6-year-old can relax and enjoy his fortune, you've clearly never spent time with a Tudor noble child. His days are regimented. Lessons in Latin, French and Italian in the morning, riding and sword practice in the afternoon, prayers and etiquette in the evening. You glimpse FitzRoy struggling through his sums, then cheering up when he's allowed to practice with real swords, albeit blunted ones, under the watchful gaze of retired soldiers. His tutor is strict but fair, though you catch him sneaking sweets to the kitchen maid when he thinks nobody's looking. The king visits often, or at least as often as his royal schedule allows. On those days, you feel the tension in the air spike. Everyone scrambles to make sure FitzRoy's hair is neat, his manners perfect, his Latin grammar flawless. The king expects nothing less than perfection, and the boy tries his best to deliver. Sometimes you see him blinking back tears after a stern correction, but he straightens his shoulders and carries on. It's what's expected. Despite everything, FitzRoy is still a child. You see him racing through the halls, his dog yapping at his heels, his laughter echoing off the stone walls. Sometimes you catch him sneaking bites from the kitchens, or making faces at the portraits of his ancestors. It's easy to forget, in those moments, that this boy is the linchpin of England's political future. There are lighter moments too, like the time the king's fool tried to juggle eggs and ended up with yolk on his hat and the Duchess of Norfolk's favourite slippers. FitzRoy laughed so hard he nearly fell off his chair. Even the king had to smile, though you could tell he was already plotting a new law banning egg juggling from court festivities. The public is not blind to FitzRoy's existence. Songs are sung about the king's son, and ballads circulate in taverns, some bawdy, some surprisingly respectful. You hear the refrain, "FitzRoy, FitzRoy," the king's own boy, sung by beggars and merchants alike. The boy's likeness appears on medallions, and the name Richmond becomes shorthand for royal favour. But not everyone is pleased. Old families grumble that the boy is being spoiled, that the king's generosity is an insult to legitimate bloodlines. You see more than a few icy glares in FitzRoy's direction during banquets, especially from nobles who remember the Wars of the Roses a little too vividly. England is not so far removed from civil war that it can afford to ignore the threat of a disputed succession. As the years tick by, FitzRoy becomes more than just the king's son. He becomes a symbol. To some, he represents hope, proof that Henry VIII can produce a healthy boy, even if not by the... You start the morning brushing dust off your best livery, because today, for the first time, you'll see a child elevated above almost every lord in England. The entire palace is buzzing, a little too loudly for comfort, considering most of the whispers are about a 6-year-old boy. Henry FitzRoy, royal bastard or not, is about to become the Duke of Richmond and Somerset, a title that would make a grown man's knees weak. For FitzRoy, it's another day of lessons in keeping your chin up and your shoes clean, even if your stomach's churning with nerves. You step into Reading Abbey, and the smell of incense hits you first, thick, almost suffocating, trying and failing to mask the collective anxiety of 100 powerful people. Banners in red and gold drape from the rafters, candles sputter, and somewhere in the chaos, someone's perfume has declared open war on the boiled mutton at lunch. The crowd is a stew of clergy, nobles, courtiers, and even a few representatives of the lowlier ranks, all desperate for a glimpse of what's about to happen. If you listen closely, you can hear the clink of swords, the nervous coughs of bishops, and faint but there the giggle of a boy who doesn't quite grasp how sharp the court's attention really is. FitzRoy is led in, dressed like a miniature king, velvet robes, golden chains, and a sword so long it nearly trips him. Behind him, his newly assigned household shuffles, looking both proud and terrified. His mother, Elizabeth Blount, stands tall in her best gown, but her eyes dart between the king and the assembled lords, calculating which way the wind is blowing. This is the moment everything changes, not just for her son, but for every ambitious family in England. Henry VIII presides over the proceedings, face split by a grin that could melt butter, or if you cross him, freeze it right back. He loves a show, and today his illegitimate son is the main attraction. The Archbishop of Canterbury, solemn and grave, begins the ceremony. He recites the traditional oaths: loyalty to the king, service to the realm, faith to God. FitzRoy, coached for weeks, answers each question in a piping voice that makes a few hardened soldiers smile. He kneels, and the sword taps his shoulder first left, then right. You can almost hear the collective intake of breath as the king declares, "Arise, Henry, Duke of Richmond and Somerset." There it is, a title older than some of the stones in this abbey, and now it belongs to a 6-year-old who was, until recently, just the king's boy. The applause is thunderous. Nobody wants to look less enthusiastic than the king, but there are plenty of clenched jaws among the courtiers. You make your way to the feast after, and what a feast it is. Platters of roast swan, gilded pastries, sugared almonds, and enough wine to drown a fleet of Spaniards. FitzRoy is placed in a high chair at the king's right hand, lords and ladies jostling for a word, a nod, or even a crumb of his favour. You watch as the Duke, cheeks flushed, tries to act as regal as possible while sneaking candied fruit when the servers aren't looking. Henry VIII claps him on the back, beaming with pride. Like father, like son, you hear him joke 3 times in fact. By the third, the laughter is a bit strained. Now the boy has land's real ones. The king grants him estates across Yorkshire, Lincolnshire and Norfolk, with incomes to match. You imagine the surprise of the old northern lords, suddenly finding themselves subject to a child, and not even a legitimate one at that. The legal documents are drafted, the seals pressed, the messengers dispatched. FitzRoy's new household is assembled at once: tutors, chaplains, stewards, squires, grooms, pages, cooks, and naturally, his own fool, a boy named Tom, whose talent for falling off benches is unmatched. Day by day, you see the machinery of power whirl to life around FitzRoy. He gets a great seal for his own letters, so if you're trying to scam free cheese from Yorkshire, good luck. His clothing allowance triples. Suddenly, everything from the colour of his hose to the style of his haircut is a matter of court gossip. He's fitted with miniature armour for tournaments, which is as practical as chainmail for a goldfish, but nobody's going to say that to the king. His schoolmasters are told to encourage strength and virtue. Translation: teach him to ride, to hunt, and above all, to look the part. You walk through his halls and see banners with his arms, books with his name inscribed, and just occasionally, muddy boot prints where he's run wild with his dogs. Because for all the pomp, FitzRoy is still a boy. He'd rather chase a rabbit than debate Cicero. Once you catch him hiding under a banquet table with a slice of pie and the fool's hat, nobody else would dare, but the king's son gets away with it. Mostly. The king is delighted, but he's also strategic. By giving FitzRoy the title of Duke of Richmond, a title last held by Henry's own father, Henry VII, before he claimed the throne, the king is making a point. It's a political message, loud and clear. FitzRoy is a potential heir, not legitimate, sure, but if the worst happens, England won't lack for a strong young man to wear the crown. You hear ambassadors muttering in corners, scribbling hasty reports back to Spain, France and Rome. Every foreign court knows now, the king's problem has a solution, if he wants it. You notice FitzRoy's household has its own pecking order. The chief steward, Lord Darcy, rules with an iron fist wrapped in velvet. The chaplain is always nearby, whispering prayers and reminding the boy about the weight of God's eyes, which, frankly, is not the most relaxing bedtime story. The master of the horse, Sir William Parr, yes, that Parr family oversees FitzRoy's first ponies, and eventually his first proper horse, a grey called Cloud, that bites anything in arm's reach, including the master of the horse. Even at 6, FitzRoy is learning that trust in his world is a rare and precious currency. The lessons grow more intense. You sit in on a Latin tutorial that turns into a disaster when FitzRoy accidentally tips an inkwell into his own lap. The tutor blanches, and the boy's laughter ricochets off the walls, earning a rare smile from Lord Darcy. At fencing practice, You see FitzRoy take a wooden sword to the knee, then stand up, jaw clenched, refusing to cry. "A king doesn't weep," he says, quoting something his father once told him. The servants exchange glances, nobody corrects him. Of course, there are pitfalls. You hear stories of older boys at court, jealous of the duke's titles and privilege, who plot ways to trip him up, sometimes literally. At one feast, a noble's son accidentally dumps a jug of ale in FitzRoy's lap. The king notices, and the unlucky lad is sent to the Welsh borders for a few months to reflect on his manners. Message received. FitzRoy's education isn't just books and bruises, though. He learns diplomacy from watching his elders. He learns suspicion from watching his back. You see him growing shrewder every year, catching the half-truths and double meanings in every conversation. Even at 7, he knows better than to trust anyone who calls him prince. The Queen, Catherine of Aragon, rarely interacts with FitzRoy. When she does, it's with the icy politeness of someone forced to pet the neighbour's badly behaved dog. You watch her at Mass, praying so fervently her rosary beads creak, her eyes never leaving the altar. She knows what everyone else knows. FitzRoy's existence is a living challenge to her daughter Mary's right to the throne. There's no hiding the tension. Every time the king grants FitzRoy another favour, a manor here, a hunting licence there, the Queen's supporters gnash their teeth a little louder. It's not just family drama, it's the stuff wars are made of. You overhear a diplomat mutter, "England is a tinderbox," as if you hadn't noticed the flammable atmosphere yourself. Still, outwardly, everything is celebration. The king hosts a tournament in FitzRoy's honour, where grown men in armour accidentally fall off their horses rather than upstage the little duke. The child is paraded before crowds, who cheer mostly out of loyalty, but also because they've learned the hard way that cheering is safer than silence. One afternoon, you catch FitzRoy sneaking out to the kitchens, looking for pastries. He finds the scullery maid, Marjorie, with a crooked smile and quick hands, who slips him a sugared bun and winks. "Even dukes need allies," she says, and he giggles, mouth full, making a mental note to add Marjorie to his list of trustworthy souls. It's a short list. By his 8th birthday, FitzRoy's life is mapped out with military precision. He's got his own council of tutors and advisors, daily reports sent straight to the king, and enough household accounts to keep 3 scribes busy. You notice he's allowed just enough freedom to run wild for an hour each day, but always with a watchful eye nearby. The king doesn't take chances. The one thing FitzRoy is never given, the title of prince. For all the favour, all the gifts and ceremonies, the line remains. It's the difference between a velvet cushion and a throne, and everyone at court is painfully aware of it. You see FitzRoy glance at Mary during court dinners. She, the legitimate child, with fewer privileges, and he the beloved bastard. If you told a London merchant or a Yorkshire sheep farmer in the 1520s that a boy of 7 was running half the north of England, they'd have laughed, then double-checked their tax bills. Yet here you are watching as Henry FitzRoy, the king's openly acknowledged bastard, is handed something no other child, legitimate or otherwise, has ever held: the keys to a kingdom within a kingdom. This isn't just ceremonial. The king means business. FitzRoy is sent north with a council of trusted adults, statesmen, lawyers, clerics, ostensibly to learn, but in reality to rule. You notice right away that this is more than a gilded summer camp. The air in Yorkshire feels different. Even the mutton tastes bolder up here. There's a low fog over the moors most mornings, and locals eye FitzRoy's southern entourage with suspicion. Southerners are rarely popular north of the Trent, but the king's will is law, and the Duke's banner now flaps over castles from Pontefract to Sheriff Hutton. FitzRoy's Council of the North is England's second government, a kind of training ground for monarchy. You see him sitting at the head of the council table, legs swinging, face set in concentration, while grey-bearded lords argue about wool tariffs and vagrancy. The real decisions are handled by men like Lord Darcy and Sir Thomas Tempest, but it's FitzRoy who gives the orders, FitzRoy whose seal is stamped on every letter and proclamation. You sense the hush when he enters a room, the sideways glances from lords and abbots who remember when this region was last in rebellion. The Wars of the Roses are only 2 generations past. The wounds still itch when it rains. At first, the boy's authority is more theory than practice. You see the councillor's patience stretched as FitzRoy muddles through reports, asks questions about the grain harvest, and signs documents with slightly inky fingers, but he learns fast. Soon enough, he can recite the names of every shire, every castle, every influential noble between the Wash and the Scottish border. He listens as his tutors explain that the north is restless, always just one hungry winter or one royal slight away from rebellion. You hear him repeat the lesson at dinner, mouthful of venison. If you want loyalty, you have to feed the wolves. He grows into his role. Inspecting troops at York, FitzRoy sits astride his now famous grey horse, Cloud, and does his best impression of his father. Back straight, chin up, eyes sweeping the ranks. The soldiers, many of whom fought under Henry VIII himself, offer their cheers dutifully. You spot a few smirking at the idea of taking orders from a boy, but none dare voice it openly. After all, FitzRoy's banner carries the authority of the king, and in the king's England, power is what you say it is. The king visits too, from time to time. When Henry VIII arrives, the city of York turns out in force. Bells ring, banners wave, the air smells of new hay and old ale. You see father and son side by side on the city walls, surveying their second capital. For the king, it's a test run. Can this boy be trusted with real power? For FitzRoy, it's a chance to prove he's more than just a figurehead. The king throws him questions about legal cases, military garrisons, the price of wool. FitzRoy, with some nudges from his council, answers everyone. Off duty, the boy learns the unspoken lessons of power. He sits with abbots who want more land for their sheep, hears petitions from local guilds, listens as a widow begs for mercy over unpaid taxes. Sometimes his decisions are kind, sometimes imperious. The councillors note it all down, sending secret reports back to the king. You watch FitzRoy's signature, once shaky and childish, grow steadier with each passing month. Already, he's developing the sly, slightly distracted gaze you see in every Tudor who survives to adulthood. His household becomes the beating heart of northern society. Nobles invite him to their hunting lodges, eager for favour, or at least for the king's eye to fall kindly on their family. His feasts are the talk of Yorkshire, huge spreads of beef and venison, capons roasted with oranges, pies filled with eel or apple, sometimes both, but never on purpose. You watch FitzRoy try to stay awake through endless banquets, making polite conversation with men who have beards older than he is. At one feast, the jester accidentally dunks his own hat in a bowl of custard. The boys' laughter carries all the way to the kitchens, where the staff bet on whether their young master will outgrow his love of practical jokes. Spoiler, he won't. The king's intentions are clear to anyone with eyes. This isn't just about managing estates, it's about grooming an heir. England is still haunted by memories of weak kings and disputed successions. By putting FitzRoy in charge of the north, Henry VIII is sending a signal: I can make, unmake and remake the future whenever I please. The court in London gets the message. So do foreign ambassadors, who write home that the king's bastard is practically a prince, and possibly more. You hear the muttering of the old families, the Percys, the Nevilles, the Cliffords. Their pride aches at answering to a child, but their survival instincts win out, at least for now. FitzRoy, for his part, knows he's walking a tightrope. You see him practice his signature with exaggerated flourishes, as if extra ink could make him more legitimate. He studies heraldry with the zeal of a boy who knows his coat of arms is both a shield and a target. Every day, he's reminded he is not prince. But as far as Yorkshire's concerned, he's close enough. Petitions pile up at his door, and his decisions affect more lives than he can count. You see the gratitude in some faces, the envy in others. Not everyone is pleased when the king's son forgives a debt or settles a feud. Justice in the north has always been a matter of perspective. Still, FitzRoy's youth gives him an advantage. Children say things adults can't, and sometimes a blunt question cuts through layers of courtly nonsense. At a council meeting, he asks, "Why don't we just feed the hungry instead of punishing them? The silence is so thick you could spread it on bread." Later, Lord Darcy explains that politics doesn't work that way. FitzRoy listens, then repeats the question at dinner just to watch the adults squirm. In between lessons, FitzRoy escapes into the countryside, riding, hunting, or on lucky days, just lying in the grass watching clouds. These are his happiest moments, away from tutors, from scheming nobles, from the relentless weight of being the king's son. Once you find him up a tree with his dog pretending to be Robin Hood. The guards pretend not to notice, but you see a few of them smile. Even in a world of crowns and councils, a boy needs room to breathe. His mother, Lady Elizabeth Blount, visits less often as the years go on. Her position at court is delicate. She's honoured, but always at arm's length, a living reminder of the king's ability to rewrite the rules. FitzRoy misses her more than he lets on, but he learns not to complain. In the north, everyone has a stiff upper lip and a thicker wool cloak. As FitzRoy approaches adolescence, the stakes rise. You hear more talk of succession at court. The Queen grows more desperate. Her own position is increasingly precarious. If FitzRoy is being groomed as a backup heir, where does that leave Princess Mary? The councillors tread carefully, but the questions hang in the air like the morning mist. Back in Yorkshire, FitzRoy is becoming a symbol. His likeness appears in stained glass. His name is invoked in prayers, and schoolboys boast about serving him water at dinner. He's both an inspiration and a warning, a reminder that favour is fickle, and that kings can bestow crowns or snatch them away with a flick of the wrist. By 14, FitzRoy is almost a man, tall and pale, with the FitzRoy red in his hair and the Tudor worry in his eyes. He rides out with his council, makes speeches in the shire halls, and on good days, still manages to pinch a pie or two from the kitchens. The North, once sceptical, learns to respect him, if only because the king will not tolerate anything less. Every so often, the shadow of succession falls long and cold over Tudor England, and you notice its chill most keenly in the uneasy relationship between Henry FitzRoy and his half-sister Mary Tudor. Princess Mary is legitimate, born to Queen Catherine of Aragon, and by law heir to her father's throne, but every move her father makes suggests he's not satisfied with the daughter God has given him. The court is divided, like a chessboard after a furious opening. Mary on one side, FitzRoy on the other, with Henry VIII shifting pieces at will, sometimes favouring, sometimes discarding, and always demanding. You watch as Mary and FitzRoy cross paths at court, both young but already wary. She is careful, precise, schooled in etiquette, and in holding her tongue. He, buoyed by his father's obvious affection, is less cautious, more open, perhaps too honest for his own safety. At formal banquets they are seated apart, protocol perhaps, but you suspect the distance is by design. When Mary passes FitzRoy in the corridors, her curtsy is polite but brief, her eyes rarely meeting his. You can almost hear the silent questions in every brush of silk. Which of us does our father truly want? Henry VIII, meanwhile, is growing more restless with each passing year. The king's frustration at having no legitimate male heir simmers behind every decision he makes. In public, he dotes on FitzRoy, letting the court and indeed the entire country see how much he values his son. In private, his temper is short and his prayers increasingly desperate. You see the king in the chapel, kneeling so long that even the candles seem to flicker nervously. At court, the speculation is endless, and never safe to repeat aloud. What if Henry VIII names FitzRoy as his heir? Bastard or no? What if the Pope could be convinced to allow it? Some suggest the king might set aside the ancient laws of succession, as the French have done, and make his favoured son the next king by statute. Others, more cautious, remember what happened to past monarchs who tinkered with succession. Civil wars rival claimants, blood in the Thames. If you have any sense, you keep your thoughts to yourself and your head down during prayers. Princess Mary feels the strain most. As her mother's only surviving child, she is surrounded by those who remind her, day and night, that her claim is legitimate, divinely sanctioned, and in their eyes, unassailable. Yet she sees the way her father glances toward FitzRoy, the way the lords and bishops whisper in corners, the way the Spanish ambassador, her mother's staunch ally, grows more anxious with every favour shown to the king's son. Mary's lessons are thick with history and theology, but no tutor can teach her how to compete with a living, breathing reminder that her father wants a son. You notice the personal cost on both children. Mary's childhood is coloured by caution and self-control. She must be perfect, always, or risk losing her father's already wavering affection. She writes carefully worded letters to her mother, to the king, to foreign dignitaries, letters that betray, between the lines, the loneliness of a girl forced to act like a queen before her time. FitzRoy, for all his privilege, carries his own burden. He knows he is not legitimate, that the law is not on his side. He's old enough to understand the jokes in the street, the tight smiles of the older lords, the tension in every room he enters. Yet the two are more alike than either would admit. Both are living symbols of their father's ambitions and failures. Both learn to guard their hearts and their words. Both know that a single mistake could be fatal, not just for themselves but for everyone who loves them. Henry VIII's court becomes a stage for their rivalry, even if neither child wishes it so. You see the king hosting elaborate masques and tournaments, sometimes giving the highest honours to Mary, sometimes to FitzRoy. The message is always ambiguous. "See how generous I am to both my children," he seems to say. But everyone knows that in Henry's England, generosity can turn to wrath in a heartbeat. Mary's supporters grow more vocal, pressing her claim at every opportunity. They point to her legitimate birth, her mother's royal pedigree, her intelligence and piety. FitzRoy's allies counter with the king's obvious affection, the boy's steady hand in the north, his popularity among soldiers and commoners alike. Secret alliances are forged and broken, gifts are given, bribes accepted, rumours spread like spilled ink. You hear that at night. FitzRoy sometimes sits with his tutor and asks, "Why does the law matter so much if my father is the king?" The tutor answers carefully, very carefully, reminding him that laws are like chains meant to bind everyone, even kings, lest chaos rule. FitzRoy frowns but listens, learning the lesson that every Tudor must learn. Power and legitimacy are never quite the same thing. Meanwhile, Queen Catherine grows more isolated. Her health falters, her influence wanes. She clings to Mary, pouring her hopes and fears into her daughter. You see her in the chapel, fingers tight on the rosary, praying for another miracle, another child, prayers that go unanswered. Henry visits less often, distracted by politics, by his other family, by the increasingly urgent question, what happens if he dies without a male heir? FitzRoy, for his part, is still more at home in the north than at court. There, he is treated like a prince, his word law, his presence a reassurance that the king's power extends even to the wildest shires. He rides out with his council, hosts feasts, holds court, and sometimes manages to escape for a few hours of honest fun, chasing hares with his dog or racing his friends through the fields. But even here, the shadow of Mary looms. Every decision he makes, every favour he grants, is weighed against the question, would a true king have done the same? As both children grow, so do the stakes. The king's hopes and the kingdom's future hang on the fragile bodies of two teenagers who never asked for any of this. FitzRoy's counsellors begin to whisper about marriage prospects, about the possibility of legitimising the boy by Act of Parliament or papal bull. Mary's allies urge her to stay close to her mother, to cultivate support among the powerful and the pious. Each learns to read a room, to sense shifting alliances, to protect themselves with charm and wit, or failing that, with silence. And then, the whispers reach fever pitch. You hear rumours of a plot to declare FitzRoy illegitimate, to name him heir in the absence of a son by the Queen. The Spanish ambassador writes home in code, warning that England's succession is a snake's nest, and urging his king to prepare for all eventualities. Meanwhile, commoners in the streets of London and York grumble about taxes, about war, about a king who seems more interested in his own love life than the welfare of his people. Yet, in the palace, life continues as it always has. FitzRoy continues his lessons, Mary hers. The king hosts feasts, attends tournaments, presides over Parliament, and always watches both children with an intensity that is half love, half calculation. You get the sense that for Henry VIII, the line between family and politics no longer exists, if it ever did. You see FitzRoy at Mass, kneeling beside his counsellors, eyes closed in prayer. You see Mary at her lessons, practicing Latin declensions and royal signatures, her handwriting a study in discipline. Both look older than their years, wise beyond their childhood, shaped by a whispers, they say, can topple kingdoms, and in Henry VIII's court, They might as well be currency. You walk through Whitehall's echoing corridors and hear them everywhere, in the shuffle of velvet slippers, in the careful cough behind a screen, in the sighs of ladies-in-waiting who know better than to speak openly. The gossip tonight is fevered and dangerous, circling like hawks above one boy, Henry FitzRoy, and one unthinkable possibility that the king is planning to legitimize his bastard. It starts, as most seismic shifts do, with desperation. Henry VIII, by now, is both increasingly pious and increasingly paranoid. Years have slipped by without the Queen giving him a living son. The royal nursery is still, except for the laughter of Princess Mary beloved, but never enough. The king's mood darkens, his appetite for risk grows. You see it in his restless pacing, in the sudden rage that boils over at court when someone dares mention succession. You see it in the long hours he spends with FitzRoy, talking quietly with counsellors who nod a little too eagerly. By now, FitzRoy is the most powerful child in England, and one of the most scrutinised. His every cough or stumble is noted, dissected, and carried, with embellishments, all the way from Yorkshire to Rome. Foreign ambassadors watch him with narrowed eyes. The Pope receives letters from Catherine's supporters, all but begging him to remind Henry of the rules. The Emperor in Spain receives detailed reports, full of coded warnings about the king's unnatural affections and a possible change to the laws of inheritance. You're there, in the background as the rumours begin to crystallise into plausible plans. Some at court are bold enough to speak openly, mostly those whose fortunes are tied to FitzRoy's rise. They talk of Parliament, of ancient precedents, of how kings can, when sufficiently motivated, change the rules of succession by statute. After all, didn't William the Conqueror set aside rivals and choose his own heir? Didn't the kings of France bend the law to suit their needs? The argument gains momentum, gathering support among those who believe that stability matters more than bloodlines, at least when their own lands are at stake. Of course, not everyone is so eager. You watch as the Queen's remaining allies, loyal, shrewd and increasingly desperate, marshal their own arguments. England has never crowned a bastard, they whisper. The people will never accept it, yet you can sense the panic in their voices, the knowledge that Henry is not a man to be denied. Even the boldest courtiers hesitate before defying the king on this point. The shadow of the tower looms large in everyone's imagination. Meanwhile, FitzRoy himself is caught in a web he never wove. He's old enough now to sense the dangers, old enough to know that being his father's son is both blessing and curse. You see him flanked by tutors and minders, his days regimented down to the minute, lessons, prayers, audiences, exercises. Everything is scheduled. Everything is supervised. Every evening there's a new face at dinner, some nobleman eager to win the boy's trust, some bishop keen to remind him of his duty. FitzRoy smiles politely, but you can see the weight on his shoulders. In private, he confides in his closest companion, a young page named Simon, who's quick with a joke and, more importantly, knows when to keep silent. One afternoon, FitzRoy corners his tutor with the question that haunts his every waking moment. If my father makes me legitimate, does that make me a prince? The tutor, a careful man, replies that it's complicated. The law may say one thing, but people's hearts say another, and in England, hearts have a way of making themselves heard, sometimes with swords. FitzRoy nods, understanding more than he lets on. At the same time, you witness the delicate dance of policy and piety. Henry VIII's advisors draft documents, consult lawyers, seek out theologians willing to write treatises in favour of the king's will. You watch Cromwell, the king's up-and-coming fixer, quietly collect arguments and evidence, building a legal case for whatever outcome Henry desires. Wolsey, the aging cardinal, hedges his bets, praising FitzRoy's virtue in one breath, reminding the king of ancient custom in the next. Court life is a powder keg. Every feast, every mass, every seemingly innocent game of cards is an opportunity for spies to eavesdrop, for enemies to plot. You walk past open windows and catch snatches of Latin, rex facit legem. The king makes the law. Maybe, but laws, like kings, can be broken. As the whispers swirl, you see FitzRoy paraded more openly at court. He dines with the king, rides beside him at tournaments, attends meetings where even senior councillors defer to his opinion. His presence at these events is a message written in capital letters. The king has options, and they do not include standing still. You hear nobles discussing his progress, sometimes admiring, sometimes resentful. The Howard family, whose fortunes are tied to FitzRoy's through his marriage, more on that soon, push for his recognition with a fervour that borders on fanaticism. But there are obstacles everywhere. The Queen's supporters argue that the Pope would never bless such a move, that Parliament would rebel, that the common people would rise in anger. They point to past uprisings, Simnel, Warbeck, the echoes of Bosworth Field, and warn that England has bled enough for questions of legitimacy. The Spanish ambassador, a master of passive aggression, reminds the king of his marriage vows every chance he gets. You see the strain on Henry VIII. He vacillates, as only Henry can, one day determined to make FitzRoy his heir, the next lashing out at anyone who dares suggest that a bastard can be king. His prayers grow longer, his temper shorter. He banishes those who oppose him, promotes those who flatter, and spends increasingly restless nights pacing his chambers. The court walks on eggshells. Even the jesters keep their jokes apolitical. Meanwhile, FitzRoy himself tries to walk the line between confidence and caution. You watch him study the lives of other famous bastards, William the Conqueror among them, searching for clues about his own future. He practices signing his name with Rex, after it quickly scratching it out when someone enters the room. At night, he dreams of coronations and rebellions, of gold crowns and sharpened axes. The boy knows in his bones that every step he takes is both a privilege and a peril. You see the impact on Princess Mary too. Her mother's position grows more precarious, her own future less certain. The Queen doubles down on piety and protocol. Mary responds by becoming ever more studious, ever more precise. She watches FitzRoy from a distance, acutely aware that her own fate hangs on decisions made in secret rooms and whispered corridors. The country beyond the palace is not immune. You hear the rumble of unease among the commons, rumours that the king will make his bastard a prince, that the laws of God and man will be overturned. Some are outraged, others are indifferent, too busy surviving to care who sits on the throne. But you can sense, underneath it all, the potential for chaos, a kingdom perpetually on the edge of crisis. Then, as if to fan the flames, the king's advisors begin drafting bills for Parliament. You see the drafts, read the careful legalese, and act for the succession of the realm. The language is flexible, the intent clear. Henry wants options, and FitzRoy is the best one available. Suddenly, every noble with a daughter, every bishop with an opinion, every merchant with a grudge, has a stake in the outcome. For FitzRoy, the world narrows to a point of decision. He wakes each morning, knowing that his destiny is being argued in council, in Parliament, in every tavern and palace in the land. He tries to focus on his studies, on his duties in the north, but the question never leaves him: will my father make me king? For you, caught in the swirl of ambition and anxiety, it's an uneasy thrill. When the invitations arrive, thick parchment, crested in red and gold, perfumed with the faintest whiff of cloves, you already know this is no ordinary wedding. The entire court is abuzz, and you're swept into a whirlwind of preparation. Henry FitzRoy, Duke of Richmond and Somerset, is about to marry Mary Howard, daughter of the Duke of Norfolk, and the question on everyone's mind isn't whether the two young people like each other, but what this means for England. The Howard family is ancient, powerful, and as ambitious as a cat with its eye on the king's breakfast. You can feel their pride and their nerves in every step as they maneuver for influence. Marrying their daughter to the king's only acknowledged son is a play for proximity to power, if not to the throne itself. It's a risky move too close to the sun, and you might just get burned. The wedding preparations themselves are a spectacle. You watch Mary Howard, no more than 14, being fitted for a gown heavy enough to require 2 maids to carry the train. Embroiderers work by candlelight, weaving the FitzRoy and Howard crest together in gold thread. You pass through kitchens thick with the smell of roasting meat and sugared almonds, where the cooks mutter about feeding 1,000 mouths and the stable boys scrub hooves until their arms ache. FitzRoy, for his part, is playing along like any noble son, dutiful, respectful, and a bit bewildered by the fuss. You catch him in a rare quiet moment, fidgeting with the cuffs of his doublet, muttering that he'd rather be riding or fencing. The boy is growing fast, tall for his age, but he's still awkward at grand banquets. At the rehearsal dinner, he forgets a line in the procession and nearly trips on his own cloak. His future wife gives him a quick, knowing grin. Their children caught in a drama written by kings. The day of the wedding arrives in a riot of sound and colour. Bells ring out across the palace, carriages rattle into the courtyard, and the whole of London seems to surge toward the festivities. The service is held at Hampton Court, where the air is thick with incense, summer roses, and enough nervous anticipation to power the royal kitchens for a year. Nobles elbow for the best views, foreign ambassadors scribble notes for their masters, and every court poet is suddenly an expert on true love. The ceremony itself is dazzling, if a little stiff. FitzRoy and Mary Howard stand together, gold circlets on their brows, hands joined by the Archbishop. The vows are recited in Latin and English, and every "I will" is as much a declaration of political intent as personal feeling. You watch Henry VIII beam from his throne, his pride barely concealed behind a wide smile. For a moment you sense what he's imagining, a dynasty preserved, his bloodline secured, perhaps even a line of FitzRoy kings, stretching into the future. You also catch the sidelong glances among the nobles. To the Howards, this is their golden ticket. To others, it's a warning shot. The king's bastard isn't just a powerful noble, he's now in line to form his own faction, backed by one of the greatest families in England. Even the Queen's supporters can't ignore the implications. Princess Mary is noticeably absent from the front row. Her absence is a statement, whispered about in every corner. There is no truce between her cause and FitzRoy's. The feast after the ceremony is as grand as any coronation banquet. Platters of roast peacock, pies shaped like castles, fountains flowing with wine if you can eat it, drink it, or wear it as a ridiculous hat. It's on display tonight. The music is constant, laughter raucous, and at least 2 nobles end up in the fountain before midnight. You catch glimpses of FitzRoy and Mary seated at the high table, careful and composed, taking polite bites and exchanging the occasional uncertain smile. Whatever else this is, it's an alliance forged in public, under the scrutiny of 100 pairs of watchful eyes. As the celebrations continue, the whispers turn to politics. The Howards waste no time cementing their position. You see them working the room, congratulating their daughter, currying favour with the king, plotting future matches for their other children. Their patriarch, Thomas Howard, is everywhere at once, offering wise counsel here, a wink and a hint there, quietly reminding everyone that his family now has a direct line to the throne. Foreign ambassadors too take note. The French in particular are keenly interested. Their reports back to Paris speculate on what this might mean for the fragile balance of power in Europe. If FitzRoy were ever to be legitimised, this marriage would give England a future queen already connected to one of its oldest houses. The Spanish, naturally, are less pleased. They see it as a direct threat to Mary Tudor's claim and to Catherine of Aragon's legacy. The papal representatives just try to look pious and above the fray, which, considering the dinner's wine selection, is no easy feat. FitzRoy and Mary themselves are swept along in the tide of expectation. You see them at tournaments, where FitzRoy rides with more confidence now. Cheered by the Howard banners, Mary attends as his Duchess, her presence dignified and serene. You sense a cautious camaraderie building between the two, awkward at first, but growing more genuine as they realise they are both prisoners of fortune. They share tutors, chaplains, and even a private joke or two about the court's obsession with their every move. At Richmond, their household becomes a microcosm of the larger court. Young men jostle for positions as squires or cupbearers, eager for advancement. Maids compete to be Mary's favourite, and gossips speculate endlessly about the couple's future. The Howards are careful, never overstepping, always showing the proper deference to the king, but never letting anyone forget their daughter's elevated status. Still, there is an undercurrent of fragility. You see FitzRoy, despite his public bravado, sometimes retreat into himself. He is aware that his fortunes rest on his father's favour, and that the tides of power can turn quickly. Mary, for her part, shows quiet resolve, having learned from her father's cautious politicking. In quieter moments you see them walking together in the palace gardens, voices low, eyes darting to be sure no one overhears. Not all is smooth, of course. There are rivalries, other young nobles jealous of FitzRoy's rapid rise, factions unhappy with the Howards' influence, those loyal to Princess Mary who see the marriage as a direct challenge. Even among FitzRoy's own household, alliances shift, ambitions collide, and you quickly learn that trust is as rare as an honest jester. You attend a masque hosted in their honour, where the theme, naturally, is the triumph of love over adversity. The costumes are elaborate, the music lively, but the subtext is unmistakable. Everyone is watching, waiting to see if this match will produce a new claimant to the throne. FitzRoy laughs dutifully at the jokes. Mary dances with practiced grace, but you sense the pressure weighing on them both. They know their every action is a message to the kingdom. And then, just when you think the celebrations might finally settle into routine, the court is rocked by a new round of rumours. Some whisper that FitzRoy's marriage is merely a prelude to his being named heir. Others insist it's an empty gesture, a way to keep the Howards loyal while the king pursues other options. You see FitzRoy's father watching it all from behind narrowed eyes, calculating as always. Through it all, life goes on. FitzRoy returns to his duties in the north, Mary to her new role as Duchess of Richmond. Together they host banquets, dispense charity, and try to find some semblance of normalcy amid the politics. At court, they say that you're either the spider or the fly, no in-betweens. And as FitzRoy enters his teenage years, you quickly learn how much truth is packed into that cliché. Henry FitzRoy, newly married and freshly empowered, is no longer just a royal child propped up by adult hands. He's a magnet for ambition, envy, and the kind of political attention that would send most grown men running for the nearest monastery. Now FitzRoy's household is a battleground, and every day you're dodging the crossfire. The Howards, proud of their daughter Mary's place at FitzRoy's side, scheme to keep the king's favour, never missing an opportunity to present a new plan, alliance, or lucrative land deal. Their rivals, including some of the old northern families and a few sharp-tongued courtiers, push back at every turn. It's as if every ambitious man in England wakes up each morning wondering how to put a leash on the king's son. You watch the young Duke navigate these waters with a combination of inherited charm and learned caution. FitzRoy is tall for his age, his hair a burnished red like his father's, and he's learned how to smile without ever giving away what he's thinking. In private, with Mary or his closest friends, he's still just a boy, playful, impatient, and only half interested in his lessons. But in public, he's the image of controlled nobility. Every gesture practiced, every answer measured. You see him at the centre of every gathering, not always speaking, but always being spoken about. It doesn't take long for FitzRoy to learn that every adult around him wants something: some a seat on his council, others a piece of his lands, a few the favour of the king by way of the Duke's influence. Even FitzRoy's tutors and chaplains jockey for his attention, peppering their lessons with subtle advice on whom to trust and whom to avoid. You watch as he develops a kind of sixth sense for danger. He starts to listen more than he talks, to watch more than he acts. Behind the scenes, the political tides are shifting faster than ever. Cardinal Wolsey, once the undisputed master of royal policy and FitzRoy's sponsor, is falling from grace. Wolsey's enemies, among them Thomas Howard, FitzRoy's new father-in-law, and the rising lawyer Thomas Cromwell, circle like sharks. You hear the gossip in the halls. The king is tired of Wolsey's failures, especially his inability to secure Henry's annulment from Catherine of Aragon. FitzRoy, always careful, keeps his distance, but he can't help but feel the tremors as Wolsey's downfall sends ripples through every corner of court. One autumn, you attend a meeting in the Duke's study, ostensibly about land revenues, but really a check-in on who's still loyal. The air is thick with tension. FitzRoy listens as Lord Darcy grumbles about new taxes, while Sir William Parr tries to soothe tempers with half-hearted jokes. The real drama is outside the room, where the king's messengers wait for word on the latest factional squabble. FitzRoy learns to sign his name to only the safest proclamations, never promising too much, never taking sides he can't later deny. It's a delicate balance. one you're not sure any teenager should have to strike. You notice that FitzRoy is not immune to the anxiety. On long walks with his dog, or while practicing his swordplay, you catch him glancing over his shoulder, searching for listeners. He confides in Mary, now more a partner than a pawn, and together they pass every bit of gossip, every smile from the king, every letter from London. Mary, trained by her Howard kin, is an expert in reading faces. She warns FitzRoy when a friendly advisor is in fact anything but. Meanwhile, in the King's Council chamber, FitzRoy's name is never far from the conversation. Cromwell, quickly becoming the King's most trusted secretary, sees FitzRoy as both an asset and a liability. If the King's marriage to Anne Boleyn produces no son, FitzRoy's value rises. If Anne succeeds in bearing a boy, FitzRoy is suddenly disposable. It's all about the odds, and you realize just how quickly fortune can turn in this world. As FitzRoy's influence grows, so does the circle of those who want to control him. Old alliances fracture, and new ones form. Some nobles, cleverly or foolishly, try to adopt FitzRoy as their patron, offering him gifts, advice, or even the promise of their daughters in future marriages. Others attempt to undermine him, spreading rumors that he is weak, sickly, or worse, disloyal to his father. It's not just the men, the women of court play their own games, slipping notes, gossip, and the occasional sharp comment into FitzRoy's world. You quickly learn that the wrong rumor can be more deadly than the right sword. In the north, FitzRoy's councillors argue over everything from wool taxes to the treatment of highwaymen. You attend endless meetings in drafty halls, watching FitzRoy learn to mediate, to compromise, to sense when to push and when to yield. Sometimes he surprises everyone, including himself, with his ability to settle disputes. Sometimes he infuriates his advisors by refusing to budge. More than once you see an older councillor storm out in a huff, only to return a day later, hat in hand, hoping for a second chance. Even at 16, FitzRoy knows that leadership means never letting anyone see you panic. But if politics is exhausting, court life is relentless. You witness FitzRoy at tournaments, his armour gleaming, his lance steady, his gaze sweeping the crowd for his father's approval. The cheers are loud, but you sense how each shout is also a test. Are you loved? Are you feared? Or are you simply the king's experiment, given power until something better comes along? You see Mary Howard watching from the stands, her face composed, her hands clasped tight. She knows the stakes, and you suspect she knows the dangers better than FitzRoy himself. You catch glimpses of the king too, sometimes distant, sometimes unexpectedly close. Henry VIII's moods are a weather system, unpredictable and potentially deadly. When he is pleased, FitzRoy is showered with favour. More lands, more honours, more public displays of affection. When the king is angry, FitzRoy is expected to retreat, to show humility, to remember that everything he has can be taken away in a moment. The lesson isn't lost on you. Loyalty is never a guarantee. In quieter moments, you see FitzRoy with his closest companions, young men of noble birth, loyal or at least eager to seem so, sharing laughter and the occasional secret. They fence, play at chess, tell bawdy jokes, some at the expense of pompous councillors, some at their own. FitzRoy's laughter is genuine, but always there's an edge of caution. Even among friends, he knows how fast rumour can spread, how small mistakes become the seeds of future scandals. Occasionally, you're present for the rare, awkward meetings between FitzRoy and Princess Mary. By now, they are teenagers, their childhood rivalry replaced with the wary truce of two people who understand that their fortunes are tied, whether they like it or not. The meetings are formal, stilted, watched closely by their minders, but beneath the surface, you sense a grudging respect. Each knows the other's loneliness, the crushing pressure of royal expectation. Once, when they are left briefly alone, you catch Mary whispering, "Trust no one." FitzRoy nods, the two of them allies for a fleeting moment before the adults return. As the years march on, FitzRoy's name is used to settle scores, win arguments, and draw new lines in the sand. Factions rise and fall. Wolsey is gone, Cromwell is ascendant, the Boleyns are on the rise, and the Howards hang on by their fingernails. Through it all, FitzRoy grows more careful, more guarded, You can see it in the way he reads every letter twice. In the way when Anne Boleyn arrives at court, the ground shifts beneath everyone's feet, including yours. You watch her glide through the palace like a comet, black hair gleaming, dark eyes sharp as cut glass, her laugh musical and unsettling. Her influence over Henry VIII is unmistakable. And it's not long before even the most oblivious courtier realizes the king's world is about to tilt on its axis. You, of course, are just trying to stay out of the way of falling stars. FitzRoy feels the tremors immediately. Suddenly, every conversation, every glance, every dinner arrangement is colored by Anne's meteoric rise. The king's obsession is open, and his plans for succession, for the church, for his own happiness begin to revolve around Anne and her promised future sons. You see FitzRoy's place at court subtly begin to shift, as if he's being pushed to the edge of a chessboard he once ruled. It starts with the seating arrangements. FitzRoy, once always at his father's right hand, now sometimes finds himself 2 seats down or across the table, the better to give Anne the place of honor. It's a small change, but in court, such things are never accidental. You watch the boy try to hide his confusion, to swallow the sting of displacement, but the court notices, the whispers begin again. Is FitzRoy still the king's favourite, or is he about to be replaced? Anne, for her part, is not unkind to FitzRoy, at least not openly. She is clever. She knows that alienating the king's son would be a mistake. You see her offer him polite smiles, include him in masks and hunts, even compliment his Latin in front of the king, but it's always just enough, never too much, and always under the watchful gaze of Henry VIII, who wants harmony but expects loyalty. Anne's supporters, the Boleyns, the Seymers, the ambitious new men keep their distance from FitzRoy, while the old guard, especially the Howards and FitzRoy's councillors, grumble privately and tighten their own alliances. The court is in a state of permanent anxiety. Queen Catherine, pushed to the fringes, becomes a shadow, her supporters less visible, but no less determined. Mary Tudor is kept further and further from the centre, her claim eroding as Anne's star rises. FitzRoy, for all his rank, is now the wild card, powerful, beloved by many, but increasingly isolated. You notice how the king's mood grows more volatile. Henry is in love, yes, but also under pressure from Anne, from Europe, from his own need for a son. He wants a clear path to a legitimate male heir, and every day without one is a thorn in his side. You see him take his frustrations out on everyone. Ministers, councillors, servants, and sometimes, sadly, on FitzRoy himself. The boy's every move is scrutinised, his every success either celebrated or suddenly irrelevant, depending on which way the royal wind blows. Rumours swirl, will the king legitimise FitzRoy after all, just in case Anne fails? Will Anne allow it, or will she push for her own child to be named heir the moment it is born? You watch FitzRoy try to navigate this tightrope. He remains diligent in his duties, governing the north, overseeing lands, appearing at state occasions, but the strain shows. He grows thinner, his eyes darker with worry, his temper shorter than it once was. He confides in Mary Howard, now more a partner than a child bride, about his fears for the future. You attend a tense council meeting in which FitzRoy, still technically the president of the Council of the North, is grilled about a minor dispute in Yorkshire. You see Cromwell, now the king's right hand, press FitzRoy harder than necessary, questioning decisions and hinting at failures. It's clear to you and to everyone in the room that the young duke is being tested. He stands his ground, but the message is clear: your future is not guaranteed. At the same time, Anne's relatives are ascendant. Her brother George Boleyn is everywhere, as are the Seymers, ambitious and sly. The Howards, once confident, now watch the Boleyns warily. You sense the whole court holding its breath, waiting for the Queen's pregnancy to result in the much-anticipated son. Every day brings new tension. Every letter from the Queen's chambers is dissected for hints. Is it a boy? Will the king finally have what he's always wanted? During this time, FitzRoy tries to stay visible, if not central. He attends the king at jousts, leads processions at festivals, appears at church with his wife. He is gracious to Anne, never giving cause for offence, but you see him grow more cautious in every move. The old camaraderie between FitzRoy and the king is not gone, but it is muted, like a favourite song now played in a minor key. Anne's presence is everywhere. You hear her laugh at dinner, see her gloved hand on the king's arm, feel the ripple as she passes through a room. Her supporters are bold, her detractors quiet but simmering. You watch FitzRoy learn to read the new balance of power, to avoid the king's rages, to accept his smaller share of attention. For a boy raised on a pedestal, it is a bitter lesson, but he endures, learning a resilience that surprises even his closest friends. Then comes the news that Anne is expecting. The court explodes in celebration, or at least the part of the court loyal to Anne. The king is ecstatic, making vows of thanksgiving, commissioning new tapestries promising that England's future is assured. You see FitzRoy join in the celebrations, his congratulations genuine, but his eyes clouded with uncertainty. He knows what a son for Anne will mean for him. At best, a place at the king's right hand, at worst, a life spent in cautious exile, useful only until he is no longer needed. Yet, as the pregnancy progresses, the mood at court becomes tense. The Queen's health is closely watched. Every whisper about a possible miscarriage, every nervous glance from the royal physician is noted and repeated. FitzRoy, caught between hope and dread, focuses on his responsibilities, seeking solace in routine and the loyalty of those closest to him. He visits the north more often, where his authority is unchallenged and where the burdens of London feel less suffocating. You hear FitzRoy's name less frequently at court as Anne's due date nears. When the Queen gives birth to a girl, Elizabeth, the disappointment is palpable. The king is crestfallen, and Anne's position, though still strong, is not unassailable. For FitzRoy, it's a strange reprieve. He is once again the only viable male heir, albeit an illegitimate one. The whispers about his possible legitimization flare up again, stronger than ever. But FitzRoy's world is smaller now, more dangerous. With every new alliance, every shift in the king's affections, he must recalculate his position. Anne, no longer content to play nice, subtly undermines him, making jokes at his expense, championing her own supporters, and pushing the king to focus on her daughter Elizabeth. You see FitzRoy become more cautious than ever, relying on Mary Howard and a shrinking circle of loyal friends to help him avoid political landmines. It is, for a time, a precarious balance. FitzRoy is still powerful, still beloved by many in the north, still the son the king could claim if he so wished. But the ground under his feet is unsteady, and every day you sense that the next crisis might send him tumbling. Still, he carries on. At feasts he offers toasts to the king and queen, his voice strong. At council, he argues his case with confidence. When he rides out in the countryside, the people still cheer for the Duke of Richmond, and at night, as you begin to notice the king's shoulders rounding, his gait slowing, the flush of youth draining from his once vigorous face, Henry VIII, once the epitome of athletic monarchy, now limps on a festering leg, every movement a reminder that time spares no one, not even a king who changes the course of history for breakfast. The air at court grows thick with worry and calculation. You can almost hear the clock ticking behind every royal decree. Henry's obsession with having a healthy male heir becomes an open wound, visible in the way he stares at Anne Boleyn's belly, at Princess Elizabeth's red curls, at FitzRoy's broadening shoulders, and increasingly serious face. The king's appetite for tournaments and feasts is undimmed, but you see his patience with courtiers and fools thinning by the day. Any joke about his health, any mention of succession, draws a glare colder than English winter. It's in these tense days that FitzRoy's name comes up again and again, not just as a symbol of the king's virility, but as an insurance policy. You watch council meetings turn into whispered arguments. If Anne fails to produce a son, and Catherine is out of the picture, who else but FitzRoy could secure the future? The laws still say no bastards on the throne, but Henry's eyes say he'd burn the law books if he had to. You notice FitzRoy walking a careful line. He's grown into young manhood, tall, fair-skinned, with a FitzRoy chin and a cautious smile. In public, he's all deference and dignity. In private, you catch him pacing his chamber late into the night, worried more than ever that every move is both a test and a trap. Mary Howard, his wife, is his confidant now, a steadying presence as the pressures mount. They are close, but childless. Even this is noted, whispered about in corners, another variable in the kingdom's anxious calculations. The king's leg worsens, an ulcer that never heals, reeking despite all the perfumed linens and elaborate salves. Physicians come and go, offering leeches, poultices, and prayers. You see the royal bedchamber become a place of dread, with Henry shouting at his attendants, cursing the pain and the doctors, and even God. On bad days, only music or the laughter of young people seems to reach him. FitzRoy, summoned to play chess or read aloud, knows better than to refuse. It's in this climate, uncertain, feverish, tinged with dread, that succession becomes the only game that matters. Anne Boleyn's star is still bright, but the king's temper with her grows shorter. Her miscarriages are more frequent, her rivals bolder. Every failed pregnancy chips away at her security. FitzRoy, who has managed not to anger Anne directly, is once again the beneficiary of royal frustration. When Anne loses another child, the king spends a full day in sullen silence, and then calls for his son. FitzRoy's meetings with his father are more frequent now, but also more somber. Henry wants to know details about the north, the state of the council, the condition of the roads, the discipline of the troops. You realize these aren't just idle questions. The king is measuring his son, imagining what it would mean if FitzRoy, not some future child of Anne's, became the next ruler. Sometimes, late at night, you overhear FitzRoy whispering to Mary that the weight of expectation is crushing. He looks at me like I'm a sword he might have to draw, or break. At court, the old families jockey for position. The Howards see an opportunity. The Seymers, the Poles, the Staffords. Everyone starts reviewing old claims, brushing up family trees, and making friends with FitzRoy, just in case. Thomas Cromwell, ever the pragmatist, keeps a close eye on the young duke. You notice Cromwell's tone with FitzRoy is warm, but always laced with warning. Fortune's wheel turns quickly. Your Grace, stand in the right place when it does. Meanwhile, FitzRoy's own health is not what it was. You see the signs, a cough that lingers too long, a paleness that doesn't quite fade. Still, he soldiers on, attending Parliament, leading processions, presiding over courts in the north. The people, especially in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, still love him. There are rumours that should FitzRoy be named heir, the north would march for him. It's a dangerous love, but FitzRoy is careful never to encourage open defiance. The tension between FitzRoy and Princess Mary has faded into a kind of sad detente. Both have learned that their fates are out of their own hands, and both walk a line between hope and resignation. When they meet at family events, their conversation is stiff, polite, and deeply weary. Mary has her own troubles, Anne Boleyn's enmity, her mother's exile, the constant pressure to be perfect, but invisible. You overhear FitzRoy confide in his chaplain. "If I were prince, I'd have no friends. As I am, I have too many." The chaplain nods, as if this is the central truth of court life. Everyone wants something, and no one trusts anyone who has what they want. As the king's health worsens, so do the stakes. A new rumour spreads that Parliament may be summoned to change the law, to make it possible for a king to name any heir he chooses. The older lords blanch at this, but the younger ones, especially those with no love for Mary or Anne, see FitzRoy as the safer option. You attend a private meeting where a letter from Rome is read aloud, warning Henry not to set aside the ancient blood. Henry throws the letter in the fire. "I am the king," he says. And for a moment you believe it means whatever he wants it to. Anne's position becomes ever more precarious. Another failed pregnancy, more political enemies, and the king's gaze is already wandering. Jane Seymour, quiet and unassuming, is suddenly a frequent presence at court. FitzRoy, wise enough to keep his head down, neither flatters Anne nor openly courts Jane's faction. He is, as always, the king's son, visible, useful, but always on the edge of the royal spotlight. One spring, FitzRoy is summoned to a hunting party in Windsor Great Park. You ride with him, seeing how the king, for all his pain and swelling, is briefly energized by the chase. For a few hours, it's almost like old times, father and son laughing, competing, sharing stories, but as the sun sets, Henry grows brooding and silent. He sends everyone ahead, then calls FitzRoy to walk with him. The talk is private, but you hear enough. If you were prince, if things were different, the words hang in the air, sharp and heavy. FitzRoy nods, says little, but you know he feels the impossible weight of what might be asked. That night, FitzRoy returns to his chamber, pale and shaken. He writes in his journal just a few lines, and then burns the page. He knows that every word, every thought, every hope is dangerous now. Meanwhile, you sense the country's mood shifting. The people are weary of uncertainty. There are bread riots in Kent, plague rumours in London, and a restlessness everywhere. In the north, FitzRoy's name is still spoken with affection. It's a golden June in 1536, but the air at court is thick with foreboding. The country is reeling from Anne Boleyn's sudden execution, her body hardly cold in the Tower, before Jane Seymour is installed as Queen. The gossip is more fevered than ever, and in the midst of this swirling uncertainty, you begin to notice something quietly, inexorably wrong. Why Henry FitzRoy? At first, it's just a cough. FitzRoy laughs it off. Everyone gets colds in the spring, especially with English weather, as unpredictable as a courtier's loyalty. But the cough lingers, grows harsher, and soon he's losing weight. His colour fades, and he begins to tire easily, even on the short walks he loves through the palace gardens. Mary Howard, now his devoted wife and closest friend, watches him anxiously, urging him to rest. FitzRoy jokes, "If I lie abed much longer, I'll sprout roots." But the fear behind her eyes is unmistakable. You see FitzRoy withdraw from public life. The king, beset with worries of his own, is slow to notice. After all, his new queen is pregnant, and for the first time in years, hope for a legitimate son seems within reach. But in quieter moments, you catch Henry VIII casting searching glances at FitzRoy, glances that linger too long on his sunken cheeks and hollow eyes. The physicians are summoned, first one, then a parade of them, each with a different remedy. There's bleeding, purging, herbal poultices, and prayers by the hour. Some whisper that it's consumption, the dreaded white plague. Others insist it's just exhaustion from years of responsibility. Either way, nothing helps. FitzRoy grows weaker by the day. You witness the subtle shift at court. Where once FitzRoy's name was spoken with hope or envy, now it's shrouded in dread. Those who built their fortunes on his future begin to edge away, pledging loyalty elsewhere. The Howards, sensing the danger, redouble their efforts to stay in the king's good graces. Mary Howard remains steadfast, refusing to leave FitzRoy's side. She reads to him, cajoles him to eat, and sits beside him as he naps through afternoons. He once would have spent riding or fencing. Rumours swirl, as they always do. Some say FitzRoy is being poisoned by rivals. Others claim it's a punishment from God for the king's many sins. A few of the braver, or perhaps more foolish courtiers wonder aloud if FitzRoy's fate is a grim omen for the Tudors. In the kitchens and servants' quarters, the old Plantagenet ghosts are invoked again. When a king's son sickens, the realm itself is ill. You see FitzRoy's world shrinking. Once the centre of northern power, now just a quiet set of rooms in St. James's Palace. He can no longer ride, rarely leaves his bed, and even speaking exhausts him. Friends and counsellors come to pay their respects, their visits brief, their words measured. FitzRoy, always gracious, tries to put them at ease with jokes, his humour gentler now tinged with wisdom beyond his years. It's a bitter irony. For all the plotting, the ambition, the shifting alliances that have whirled around FitzRoy since birth, the final battle is fought within his own frail body. You hear the prayers grow more desperate, Latin muttered by priests, whispered pleas from Mary, even a rare private vigil by the king himself. Henry VIII, faced with the possibility of losing his only son, is forced to confront his own mortality and the fragile legacy he's spent decades building. By late June, the truth is undeniable. FitzRoy is dying. Mary Howard sits by his side night and day, holding his hand, smoothing his brow, reading him poetry when he is awake. On better days, FitzRoy will ask for updates from the North. Old habits die hard, and give advice to the men he trusts most. On worse days, He simply drifts in and out of sleep, his breathing laboured, his spirit flickering. The king's visits become more frequent, though he struggles to mask his fear and guilt. You see him sit in silence, occasionally offering a gentle word or a half-hearted joke. It's clear to all, especially FitzRoy, that no words can change what is coming. The king, for all his power, cannot command life or death. For a few painful minutes, he is simply a father, helpless in the face of fate. On a humid morning in July, FitzRoy slips quietly away. The news spreads with a speed and shock that stuns the court. Some weep openly, others retreat behind polite stoicism, but everyone knows what has been lost. Not just a beloved son, but a future that for a moment seemed possible. The king is inconsolable, lashing out at his ministers, blaming everyone and no one. Mary Howard is left a widow at 17, her grief both public and achingly private. You witness the hurried arrangements for FitzRoy's burial, so different from the grand processions planned for princes. The king, perhaps out of superstition, insists on secrecy. The funeral is small, attended by only a handful of loyal friends and family. FitzRoy is laid to rest in Thetford Priory, his grave unmarked at first, as if to erase the embarrassment of his bastard birth. But those who knew him, his counsellors, his friends, Mary Howard, remember. You see their faces drawn and haunted in the days and weeks that follow. And with FitzRoy's death, the web of ambitions woven around him begins to unravel. Old alliances collapse. New ones form around the next likely heir, whoever that might be. For many, it's a moment of personal reckoning, how quickly fortunes change in Tudor England and how little even the greatest hopes can count for in the face of fate. In quiet moments, you remember FitzRoy not as a pawn or a symbol, but as a boy who once climbed trees, You watch the world grow strangely quiet after FitzRoy's death, as if everyone is afraid to speak the words aloud. The halls of St. James's Palace feel emptier. The laughter of FitzRoy's companions, once the soundtrack to a household bursting with ambition, has faded into silence. The court, that ever-churning machine of gossip and rivalry, falters for a beat, as if unsure which way to turn now that the king's only acknowledged son is gone. It's a strange, subdued aftermath. You hear the doors to FitzRoy's old rooms creak open and closed, his favourite grey horse Cloud given to another lord, his books and clothes quietly packed away. Mary Howard, his young widow, drifts through the corridors in black, her grief untouchable, her future suddenly unmoored. She receives visitors, Howards with cautious condolences, old counsellors with trembling hands, even, in a rare moment, Queen Jane Seymour herself, who offers sympathy with the air of one who knows how fragile royal fortune truly is. King Henry VIII is changed. The news of FitzRoy's death reaches him during a moment of hope. Jane Seymour is pregnant, and for the first time in years, there is a chance for a legitimate male heir. Yet the king's grief for FitzRoy is real, and it is ugly. You see him rage at his physicians, snap at his courtiers, brood for hours in his private chapel. His son is gone, and with him, so too is the safety net the king had woven around his dynasty. Henry VIII is a man who has lost control, and the whole court feels it. The funeral is swift and muted, almost furtive, as if by minimizing the spectacle, the court can somehow minimize the loss. Only a handful attend, and even among them you sense discomfort. Should a royal bastard receive such honors? Should anyone mourn too openly, or too little? You see a few loyal men, eyes red, standing by FitzRoy's grave at Thetford Priory, murmuring prayers and promises to remember him as he was. Not the king's mistake, but the king's hope. After the burial, England's political weather changes abruptly. The Howards, who had pinned so much on FitzRoy's future, are suddenly out of favour. Their influence wanes as they scramble to find a new way to stay close to the king, but their enemies are quick to pounce. Thomas Cromwell, ever the survivor, quietly severs the threads that once bound him to FitzRoy's circle, focusing instead on Jane Seymour's unborn child. In the north, where FitzRoy had once ruled with the king's authority, news of his death is met with genuine mourning. You overhear the commons, farmers, merchants, town reeves speak of the Duke who listened, the only highborn who understood their troubles. There are candles lit in York Minster, Prayers offered in small parish churches, even a few dangerous toasts in crowded inns. In a land so often governed by men who never set foot on its soil, FitzRoy had been a rare thing, a presence, not just a name. Yet, even as the North remembers him fondly, London moves on, the court's focus snaps forward. All hope now rests on Jane Seymour and her pregnancy. You hear the old whispers resurface. What if Jane too cannot deliver a living son? What if England is doomed to another generation of uncertainty? Without FitzRoy as a backup, the path ahead feels perilously narrow. Mary Howard, barely out of girlhood herself, is left in an uncomfortable limbo. The king shows her a modicum of respect, perhaps out of guilt or sentiment, but she is no longer central to anyone's plans. She lives quietly, watching the old alliances that once courted her family's favour dissolve. For a time, she remains close with Princess Mary, both young women now out of the king's direct line of succession, both survivors in their own right. As for you see how the king's court is like a flock of startled starlings together, one moment, scattering the next. The Seymours, with their quiet Jane and her powerful brothers, rise to prominence almost overnight. The Howards keep their heads down, hoping for mercy. The Boleyns, with Anne now dead, vanish into the background, their brief glory reduced to a cautionary tale. It isn't lost on anyone that FitzRoy's death was almost secretive. No great public mourning, no monuments, not even a proper royal tomb. It's as if England, embarrassed by the promise and failure, would rather forget. Yet the memory lingers, especially in the whispered what-ifs that haunt the corridors and fill the dreams of old courtiers. In Parliament, the business of succession resumes with new urgency. With no son to fall back on, Henry VIII is determined to secure his legacy through any means necessary. He moves swiftly, pushing forward the act of succession that will name Jane Seymour's child as his only legitimate heir. You see the courtiers scramble to demonstrate loyalty to the new queen, each terrified of falling on the wrong side of history. Still, there are those who quietly remember FitzRoy, the clerks who drafted his letters, the squires who rode at his side, the servants who once risked the king's wrath to sneak him pastries from the kitchens. For them and for you, the palace feels smaller now. The boy who might have been king is gone, and with him an entire alternate future for England. You find yourself haunted by small memories. FitzRoy's laugh as he chased his dog through the gardens, his patient ear for a farmer's complaint, his awkward grace at courtly dances, his hesitant hope in private moments with Mary. All gone, swept away like footprints in the rain. The king, for his part, does not speak of FitzRoy again. It's easier, perhaps, to focus on the future, the next wife, the next heir, the next desperate gamble. But you know, and the country knows, that something vital has been lost. In the unmarked grave at the foot, not just a young man, but a kingdom's safety net, has been buried. It's in these quiet... You find yourself stepping into a vast room, filled with maps, portraits, and the ghostly echoes of possibilities. An alternate Tudor England that never came to be. Here, you walk the paths Henry FitzRoy might have taken had he survived, had fortune smiled differently, and had history followed a thread unraveled only by a fragile boy's early death. First, imagine FitzRoy crowned King Henry IX. The coronation is grand, a blaze of gold and crimson, with banners bearing the lion rampant unfurled throughout London. You stand amidst the crowds, their faces alight with a mix of awe and uncertainty. England has a king, male, strong, and undeniably the blood of Henry VIII, but not the king anyone expected. It's a moment charged with the thrill of new beginnings and the shadow of old controversies. As king, FitzRoy would have faced immediate challenges. The religious landscape of England in the 1530s is a powder keg. Henry VIII's break with Rome was fueled in part by his desperate need for a male heir. FitzRoy, raised in the midst of these turbulent times, might have taken a different path. Perhaps he would have embraced Protestant reform more cautiously, or even sought reconciliation with the Catholic Church. You watch the debates swirling in the halls of power, bishops and reformers clashing over doctrine, courtiers aligning with foreign powers, and a young king trying to chart a course through a storm. Imagine FitzRoy's court, a blend of old Tudor traditions and the new ideas sweeping across Europe. His counsellors include men from Oxford and Cambridge, humanists and scholars, tempered by seasoned nobles and loyal retainers who remember his youth. You see him attending sermons, debating theology, and even sponsoring translations of the Bible into English. Unlike his father, whose religious policies could swing wildly with personal whims, FitzRoy might have brought a steadier hand to the spiritual affairs of his realm. Then there's the matter of marriage and succession. FitzRoy, married to Mary Howard, has a powerful alliance with the Howards, a family with vast influence and ambitions. You watch as they navigate court politics with care, their children raised to inherit not only lands and titles, but the responsibility of ruling England. This alliance could have shifted the balance of power at court, perhaps preventing the rise of the Seymours, or the tragic fall of Anne Boleyn. Foreign policy under King Henry IX would also be fascinating. England, caught between France and the Holy Roman Empire, is always balancing on a knife edge. You imagine FitzRoy's diplomacy, shaped by his experiences governing the North and by his understanding of continental politics. Would he have continued his father's wars? Would he have forged new alliances? The possibilities unfold like a chess game, each move carrying weighty consequences. Then there's domestic policy. You hear the voices of farmers, merchants, and townsfolk, hoping for a king who listens and acts justly. FitzRoy, having grown up closer to the people than many nobles, might have pursued reforms to ease the burdens of the common folk. Tax relief, improved law enforcement, and support for trade. You see the beginnings of early modern England taking shape, led by a monarch who understands the delicate balance between crown and commons. But even in this imagined reign, challenges abound. FitzRoy would have faced threats from rivals, those loyal to Princess Mary, to the Seymours, or to factions jealous of his birth and power. You imagine secret plots, court intrigues, and moments of tension where the young king's resolve is tested. His health, always a concern, could have been a factor, forcing him to rely on trusted advisors and family. And what of Princess Mary? In this alternate timeline, their rivalry might have softened into alliance, or rivalry into uneasy peace. You see scenes of council meetings where both voices are heard, of marriage negotiations to secure peace, and of a kingdom less divided by blood and more united by duty. This future is of course speculative, but as you walk through these corridors of what might have been, you understand the profound impact FitzRoy's early death had on England's fate. Without him, the succession crises deepened, the religious upheavals intensified, and the path of the Tudor dynasty was irrevocably altered. You're left with a haunting question: how different might England have been if a boy born in scandal had lived to rule? Would the Reformation have taken a softer course? Would civil wars have been averted? Would queens like Elizabeth I have risen at all? In this room of possibilities, the answers are as shifting as the shadows on the walls. You step back into the harsh light of reality, where the boy who might have been king is now a memory, but his death ripples through the tangled web of Tudor power with force and consequence. Henry FitzRoy's passing did more than close a chapter. It rewrote the course of English politics, shifting alliances, ambitions, and the very balance of the court. First, the immediate fallout. The Howards, FitzRoy's family by marriage and one of the most powerful noble houses in England, suddenly find themselves vulnerable. They had placed enormous faith and resources in FitzRoy's survival and rise. Now, with their golden link gone, their grip on royal favour weakens. You see Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk, retreating into cautious diplomacy, trying to mend fences and keep his family's influence alive. His letters become more urgent, his public appearances more frequent, but the court whispers that the Howards are on the ropes. Meanwhile, other families smell opportunity. The Seymours, fresh off Jane Seymour's elevation to queen, seize the moment. You watch as her brothers grow rapidly in prominence, taking seats at council tables once reserved for FitzRoy's allies. Their influence swells like a tide, and the court begins to rearrange itself around this new power centre. FitzRoy's old supporters, sensing the changing winds, either bend a knee or disappear quietly into the background. In the north, FitzRoy's absence is deeply felt. You visit York and Lincoln and hear from the local magistrates and merchants how the Duke of Richmond was more than just a figurehead. He was a presence, a stabilizing force in a land often left to fend for itself. Without him, old grievances resurface, and the crown's authority feels more fragile. The king's new representatives struggle to fill FitzRoy's shoes, and you notice a subtle erosion of loyalty and order. The loss also accelerates the king's urgency to secure the succession. With no acknowledged son left, Henry VIII doubles down on his support for his legitimate male heirs, rallying Parliament to pass the Act of Succession that cements Jane Seymour's unborn child as heir. The kingdom braces for a new era, but uncertainty still clings to the throne like a stubborn fog. You see FitzRoy's death change the game for Princess Mary too. Without a rival half-brother to challenge her claim, her position gains quiet strength among certain factions. Yet paradoxically, her path to the throne remains perilous, as religious upheaval and court politics continue to swirl dangerously around her. You glimpse Mary's resilience growing, shaped by the knowledge that she stands on a precarious cliff edge, forever balancing personal faith with political survival. Even within the king's inner circle, FitzRoy's absence leaves a void. The once powerful coalition that had rallied around the Duke splinters. Courtiers jockey to replace lost influence. Alliances dissolve, and new rivalries spark like tinder. You watch Cromwell, ever the pragmatist, navigate these treacherous waters, building his own power base, while others are swept away by the shifting tides. FitzRoy's death also leaves its mark on the king himself. Henry VIII's moods darken, his health declines faster, and his decisions grow more erratic. You see him oscillate between moments of royal strength and bouts of bitter despair, haunted by the loss of his son and the uncertain future of his dynasty. The king's private letters become more plaintive, his prayers more desperate. The court's atmosphere grows heavier. You attend feasts where laughter sounds forced, where conversations avoid the subject of succession, where even the king's favourites speak in hushed tones. FitzRoy's memory lingers like a ghost in every corridor, a reminder of what might have been and what has been lost. You also notice a cultural shift. Artists and poets begin to memorialize FitzRoy, subtly, portraits in shadowy chambers, poems with hidden meanings, songs sung quietly in taverns. These tributes are whispered rebellions against the erasure of a life that once held such promise. For many, FitzRoy is a symbol of lost potential, of the fragility of power and the cruelty of fate. And then there's the question of legacy. You trace how FitzRoy's brief life and death influenced the next generation. His story becomes a cautionary tale whispered to young princes and nobles, a reminder that birthright is a blessing and a burden, that favour is fleeting, and that the line between glory and oblivion is perilously thin. For Mary Howard, FitzRoy's widow, life becomes a quiet endurance. She remarries, as noble women must, but her heart remains tied to the memory of her husband and the vanished future they dreamed of together. Her children carry his blood, but the throne and history move on without them. You leave the court with a sense of bittersweet inevitability. FitzRoy's death didn't just close a door, it pushed it. You find yourself in a quiet, dusty corner of history, where Henry FitzRoy's name has faded from the grand narratives of kings and queens. The boy who once carried the weight of a kingdom's hopes has become something more elusive, a ghost in England's collective memory. His story, so charged and vibrant in life, now drifts in the margins, overshadowed by the towering figures who followed. Walking through Tudor chronicles and genealogies, you notice how FitzRoy is often reduced to a footnote. The king's illegitimate son, the duke who died young, his deeds, his dreams, his struggles are brushed aside, lost in the broader sweep of history's canvas. It's a stark contrast to the lavish ceremonies and whispered court intrigues that once defined his brief life. You begin to see why. FitzRoy's existence challenged the carefully constructed myths of royal legitimacy. He was a reminder that bloodlines are messy, that power is as much about perception as pedigree. For a kingdom obsessed with order and divine right, a bastard son raised like a prince was an uncomfortable truth to face. Over time, official histories prefer stories with clear heroes and villains, with neat lines of succession and sanctioned monarchs. FitzRoy's life, tangled in scandal and uncertainty, doesn't fit the mold. You sense an intentional forgetting, a quiet erasure designed to preserve the sanctity of the Tudor line as it evolved. The very idea of a bastard king is a threat to that story. Yet, beneath the surface, FitzRoy's influence lingers. You see traces in the way later monarchs dealt with legitimacy, in the cautious handling of heirs, in the court's suspicion of anyone born outside wedlock. His life set precedents, subtle but real, that shaped royal policy and public perception for generations. In literature and folklore, FitzRoy is an elusive figure, sometimes a cautionary tale, sometimes a romantic ghost king, who might have ruled. You find ballads sung in village taverns, where FitzRoy is remembered as the duke who should have been king, a symbol of lost possibilities and the harshness of fate. These songs are whispered rather than proclaimed, passed from one generation to the next, like secret treasure. You also trace how FitzRoy's story influenced the political landscape long after his death. The tensions his life exposed between legitimacy and power, between law and desire, continued to shape England's monarchy. The struggles of later kings and queens often echoed the dilemmas FitzRoy's brief life embodied. Mary Howard's descendants, though removed from the throne, carried the blood of FitzRoy into the nobility, weaving his legacy quietly through the tapestry of English aristocracy. You see how family lines intertwined, how FitzRoy's shadow extended into the lives of people who never knew him but lived in the wake of his story. Even in the reign of Elizabeth I, the daughter of Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII, you catch whispers of FitzRoy. His life was a reminder of the fragile legitimacy Elizabeth herself had to navigate. In her court, stories of bastards and rightful heirs blended, underscoring the precarious nature of royal favour. You realise that FitzRoy's fading from official history is not the end, but a transformation. His story became a mirror reflecting the complexities of power and identity in Tudor England. It's a story that history tries to tidy away, but can never fully silence. As you close the dusty books and step away from the archives, you carry with you the memory of a boy who lived too fast, who loved too much, and who almost changed the course of a nation. FitzRoy is the forgotten king, the road not taken, a whisper lost in the roar. You find yourself at the crossroads of history and memory, where Henry FitzRoy's story comes full circle, a tale of promise, loss, and the delicate weave of fate that shaped England's destiny. The boy who might have been king, whose brief life held the hopes of a kingdom, now rests quietly in the shadows, his legacy both potent and elusive. As you reflect on FitzRoy's journey, from the scandalous circumstances of his birth to the height of his power as Duke of Richmond and Somerset, from his role as ruler of the North to the uncertainty that marked his final days, you see how close England came to crowning a bastard. His existence challenged the very foundations of monarchy, forcing kings, courtiers, and commoners alike to confront questions of legitimacy, loyalty, and the nature of power. The Tudor court, a swirling maelstrom of ambition and intrigue, was shaped by FitzRoy's presence. His life altered alliances, shifted balances, and sparked debates that would resonate for generations. His marriage into the Howard family tied great houses together. His governance in the north stabilized a restless region, and his potential succession kept rival factions wary and watchful. Yet for all his promise, FitzRoy's early death changed everything. Without him, the Tudor line took a different path, a path marked by new queens, new heirs, and new conflicts. You sense the weight of what might have been, the alternate history where FitzRoy ruled England and guided it through the storms of religion and politics, with a steadier hand. In the quieter moments of history, FitzRoy is a symbol of the fragility of life and power, of the cruel twists of fate that alter the course of nations. He embodies the tension between birthright and merit, between blood and law, between the dreams of a father and the realities of a kingdom. You imagine the boy, no longer a prince or a duke, but a man who might have been, walking the halls of Whitehall with the measured steps of a king, listening to the prayers of his people in Westminster Abbey, facing down rebels in the north, raising a family that would shape England's future. It's a vision tinged with both hope and melancholy, a reminder that history is not just a series of events, but a tapestry woven from the lives of those who lived it, and those who might have. As the sun sets on your journey through FitzRoy's life, you feel the quiet pull of his story lingering in the air. It's a story of power and vulnerability, of glory and loss, of a boy caught between worlds. His name may be lost in official histories, but the echoes remain, whispers in the stones of castles in the stained glass of cathedrals, in the hearts of those who remember what might have been. And so, as you close the book on Henry FitzRoy, you carry with you a final thought. History is never certain, never fixed. It is shaped by chance and choice, by birth and death, by the fleeting lives of those who dare to dream. If you ever find yourself wondering about the unseen forces that shape the world, remember Henry FitzRoy, the royal bastard who almost was king, and the kingdom that might have been. As the day fades into twilight, you settle into a quiet calm. The story of Henry FitzRoy, the royal bastard who almost wore the crown, slowly drifts away from the bustle of court intrigues and battles for power. What remains is the gentle hum of possibility, the soft echo of a life that could have altered the fate of a nation. You think of FitzRoy not as a mere footnote, but as a boy who lived with the weight of worlds on his shoulders, yet still found moments of laughter, friendship, and hope. His story reminds us that history isn't just shaped by kings and queens, but by fragile human lives, lives full of dreams, fears, and choices made in the shadow of great expectation. The corridors of Tudor England may have forgotten his name, but the lessons linger, that legitimacy can be as fragile as the body it inhabits, that power can shift in an instant, and that even the most carefully laid plans are at the mercy of fate. FitzRoy's life is a whisper across the centuries, a reminder that the future is never guaranteed, and that sometimes the greatest stories are the ones almost lost to time. So as you close your eyes tonight, imagine the boy who might have been king, the laughter in the gardens, the careful steps through the halls, the silent prayers for a future that never came. Let his story lull you into a gentle sleep, carried on the soft wings of history's what-ifs. Good night. Sweet dreams.